Okay. Yeah, we're recording the session as well. I hope that's okay, everybody. There we go. Can everybody see that okay? Yeah, okay. So again, thanks for joining today for the Creating Sustainable Communities for Net Zero Future event. We have 3 really exciting sessions. So this morning it's going to be on community energy, can it work in social housing? Then later we're going to be going into circular economy, and then lastly electric vehicles. And so you can join for all of the sessions or any of them that kind of pique your interest. So again, I just wanted to thank Sero for sponsoring this event. They've been extremely supportive of us during our net zero journey, and we're really appreciative of them. So for this morning, we're going to be, again, like I said, community energy, can it work in social housing? This is till 11:15. We have 3 amazing speakers that I'm really, really excited to introduce. And so for the session today, we're going to be doing some introductions, followed by brief presentations from our speakers, and then Q&A from the audience.
In progress.
So if you have any questions, there's feedback. So there we go. So if you have any questions, then please put them in the chat and we'll get to them, or you can ask them at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to kick it off first just to Jeremy, Tony, and Mallory to introduce themselves, and then Jeremy will be giving a presentation first. So if the 3 speakers could just give a brief introduction, that would be great.
Okay, well, I'll kick off first then. So I'm Jeremy Brignall Thorpe. Excuse me. Currently, on the Powys Council as a councillor, but also now as Assistant Cabinet for the Climate Emergency. But I'm also on the board of Community Energy Wales, and I previously worked for Share Energy before joining Powys Council.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Right, I'm Tony Cook. I'm involved in Cardiff Community Energy, and I've been also involved in a number of other community energy groups over several years. I'm also treasurer for a local community group in Penarth, which hosts a library of things, which is going to be one of the sessions that's following on later than this. And they have an electric cargo bike and electric van, which fits in with your 3rd session. So other connections. I also do policy development work for the Green Party in Wales.
Thanks, Tony.
Mallory Davies,
I'm Mallory Davies. I'm Chief Officer of Partneriaeth Ogwen, one of the founders of Ynni Ogwen, and still director there. I'm also director of Ynni Cymunedol Cymru. Not sure if the translation's coming through, but I'll just say that in English now.
I work for a social enterprise called Partneriaeth Ogwen. I'm one of the founding directors of Ynni Ogwen, a community hydro scheme in Bethesda, and I'm also, like Jeremy, I'm a director of Community Energy Wales.
Great. Thanks so much for the brief introductions. Jeremy, if you wanted to go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, I'll attempt to share the screen.
Okay.
Right, can you all see that?
I think it's low. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Okay, jolly good. So yeah, so I'm Jeremy Brignall Thorpe, and as I said, I'm on Powys County Council and Community Energy Wales, and as far as Community Energy Wales is concerned, that's historically been very involved in community energy projects, but we are starting to get a bit more interested in housing retrofit. So, and that's where my interest is sort of moving as well. So I think the combination of the community energy and housing retrofit is very relevant here, because we're talking about trying to bring sort of solar PV and so on onto housing, rooftops housing. And so previously, yes, I was employed by Share Energy. That I resigned from that when I came onto the council to avoid any conflicts of interest. But with Share Energy, I was worked for there 10 years, setting up community energy projects. And they covered all sorts of technologies, so hydro, PV, wind turbines, biomass fuel, and all sizes from a 50 kilowatt solar scheme up to a 1.8 million pound wind turbine. So That's all fairly relevant to what we're looking at here. So how do I go to the screen? How do I go to the next screen on this? Oh, there we go. So what is a community energy scheme then? This is a very brief sort of rundown here. So basically, all of the schemes that we set up with Share Energy were technically what known as community energy projects. It's a community scale generator, so it's going to be bigger than just a normal domestic household scheme, such as a 4PV rooftop PV installation. So it'll be bigger than that, but generally smaller than the massive sort of commercial schemes that you get. So it can be anything from a sort of 100 kilowatt hydro scheme or sort of a 1 or 2 100 kilowatt PV array, that sort of scale. Most often they are set up as community benefit societies. And a community benefit society is what's termed a registered society. And they are similar to, but have distinct differences from companies. Some of the early community energy schemes were set up as cooperatives, and the community benefit societies and cooperatives are very similar things, and they're both classified as registered societies, and they register with the Financial Conduct Authority rather than Companies House. Some of the key differences between a registered society, such as a community benefit society, and a company, is that a community benefit society is set up on much more democratic and sort of ethical basis. So they have to conform to certain basically the values and principles of the cooperative movement. So they're fully transparent and so on. They have some special advantages from our point of view, in that there are special rules that mean that community benefit societies can issue shares at in a much more cost efficient way than a company can. The rules around what's known as the Financial Services Marketing Act says that if you do a share offer as a company, it has to go through a very large amount of due diligence that basically costs of a large amount of money, so several hundred thousands of pounds, to do a share offer for a public share offer for a limited company. And community benefit societies have special dispensation to do share offers that have a lower level of due diligence. That means that they can be done at a scale that is appropriate for a community energy project, where you're raising maybe a few hundred thousands of pounds rather than a few million pounds. So that's one of the main reasons that community benefit societies are used. It's the one tool that enables you to do a fairly small scale share offer. So they're funded by community shares, most of these community energy schemes, and basically with a community benefit society, you become a member by buying shares, and there's a sort of a direct it means the same thing. A shareholder means exactly the same thing as being a member, because by being a member or by buying shares, you become a member. And most of these community energy schemes are funded in part or whole by community shares. So some of the smaller ones, where you're looking to raise a few £100,000, the capital will be entirely raised by shares. Some of the larger ones, they might have some of the capital come in from commercial loans, but there will be part of it that comes in from community shares. So they're a sort of democratic organization. There will be all these people who have bought shares that have become members, and there will be a board, a voluntary board, that's elected from the membership, and anyone who is a member can stand to be elected to the board. And that's the way the whole membership tries to be as transparent as possible. When people have bought shares in this community energy project, so basically the community will come up with a project they want to take part in, to put some solar panels on some buildings, or to build a wind turbine, or whatever it happens to be. They will raise money through a community share offer, and lots of people put in money, and that can be varying from £100 up to sort of tens of thousands of pounds. There's all sizes of that people will invest in these community schemes. And then once it's up and running, the members will be paid a fair return on the shares that they have bought. So it will be sort of probably a 3 or 4 or 5% interest. The principle of a community benefit society is that the interest has to be a fair return, and if the society were to suddenly make massive profits, that can't be shared out among the members. The members would continue to get their fair return, and any surplus profit above that would be recirculated back as a community benefit fund and go back to the community. So one of the that's one of the other conditions or differences between a company and being a community benefit society, that in a company you can basically give as much interest as you want to the shareholders. In a community benefit society, it is limited to being a fair return. And then all the surplus profit is used, would go back into the community. The reason that, I say, some of the early societies were set up as cooperatives, but the Financial Conduct Authority changed their sort of attitude towards cooperatives and community benefit societies in regard of renewable energy schemes. They argue that in theory a cooperative is there to trade with its members, and since community energy schemes are not really able to trade with their members, they can't sell electricity to their members, and therefore community energy schemes, the Financial Conduct Authority decided, were no longer eligible to be set up as cooperatives, and therefore they, from that point that ruling was made, they generally have always been set up as community benefit societies. It's a technicality, but that's the reason why some of the early ones were cooperatives and some of the later ones are community benefit societies. So one of the challenges of community energy schemes is that people can invest in them and set up their project, but it is quite a struggle. A lot of people say, well, can I buy my energy from my community energy scheme? I bought some shares in a local PV or a wind turbine, and can they sell the electricity back to me? And there is a technical difficulty with doing that. Lots of schemes would love to be able to, but the fundamental problem is that if the scheme were to sell electricity back to its members, the member would have to be able to buy all of their electricity from the scheme, because you only have one electricity supplier. And so when the solar PV wasn't generating, they would have to be able to find ways of buying electricity on the open market in order to be able to sell that electricity to their members at times when their own generator wasn't able to supply it. And so the technical difficulty of trying to manage that sort of trading on the electricity markets is generally a barrier that is very difficult for a local community energy scheme to overcome. So I just mentioned that as and I think other people will talk about that a bit more later in terms of how we're trying to overcome that. So what's the potential for PV generation in the UK? We're still really only scratching the surface. 1.4% of the area of the UK is buildings, so there's a potential for rooftop solar of more than 100 gigawatts, and only so with less than 5% of rooftops actually covered yet. And it could actually form a significant part of the UK peak demand. Now, solar PV is now financially viable on rooftops as long as most of the power is used on site, and I'll go into that just a bit more in the next couple of slides. So in 2019, feed-in tariff ended, and there were lots of worries that this would slow down how much PV was installed. And in fact, just at the end of feed-in tariff, lots of PV installers were starting to sort of stop doing PV installations. But with the rising electricity prices and install costs coming down, that has completely reversed, and now there is a lot of lots of people are wanting to put PV on the roofs. And it makes economic sense on domestic housing as long as you use a significant amount of that electricity on site. That basically means if the house is occupied during the day, then it will make sense to have PV on the roof. If everyone's out at work during the day and the house is empty during the day, then it makes less economic sense at the moment to put PV on roofs. But if the electricity is being used, then PV, even without the feed-in tariff, is viable. So how can we make this work at a community level? This is an example of a PV scheme that was done while feed-in tariff was still in operation. So this was done in the Midlands in partnership with Cannock Chase District Council. It's a very nice scheme that Share Energy were involved with, where they put solar panels on the roof of about 300 council bungalows. The reason they were bungalows was twofold. Firstly, it's easier to put PV panels on a bungalow roof because you don't need scaffolding, and that made the costs cheaper. But secondly, the bungalows tended to be those occupied by sort of retired people who were more likely to be at home during the day, and therefore there was more likely to be benefit from using the electricity on site. Now, the crucial thing here is that this scheme was able to go ahead because the feed-in tariff was in place, and therefore the feed-in tariff, the Community Benefit Society registered for the feed-in tariff and got that income directly from the energy supplier. It didn't need any financial transaction to take place with the tenants. The tenants got free electricity, but the tenants didn't have to pay anything for electricity. And therefore, there wasn't a need for the Community Society to bill the tenants for anything. The Community Benefit Society got adequate income from the money it got from the feed-in tariff. The difference now is that because the feed-in tariff has gone away, for a community energy scheme to work, it would have to be able to get its income by billing tenants a modest price for the electricity that is being generated, and that just creates an extra level of administrative complication that we need to try and to get past. So one scheme that is now starting to do PV post feed-in tariff is Big Solar Co-op. So they are now able to, as it's a community energy scheme, it's trying to scale up by doing things at a larger scale than the previous small schemes, but they are now starting to do PV installations on roofs in without needing the feed-in tariff. But what they are focusing on at the moment is bigger sites like this one, where the administrative cost of trying to bill the occupant for the electricity are much easier because you're just dealing with one client. So on a school like this, the arrangement will be that they'll install the PV, the school will pay something for that electricity at a fairly modest price, so that they're getting a very good deal. But the Big Solar Co-op will need to actually bill the building for the electricity that's used. And the key thing for being able to scale this down to social housing is how we can manage to actually charge the tenants for use of the electricity in a way that is sort of administratively viable to do. So could it work on social housing? Sorry, this has been a bit of a rapid run through, but I'm aware of the time. I think it probably could work on social housing, but we need to think about how we can put in place a fair mechanism for charging the building occupants for use of the electricity consumed, because it's different from when the feed-in tariff was there, when we could just give the tenants electricity that was free. We need a high proportion of on-site use. What I haven't really gone into very much here is that the reason for you need a high proportion of on-site use is that the value of the electricity, if it's used in the building, is that you're replacing grid electricity, which they're paying currently about 40p a kilowatt hour for. If you export it, you only get a much smaller price for the electricity of sort of, I think 10 or 15p is the value of the smart export guarantee at the moment. So you get a much lower price for your electricity if it's exported to the grid than if it's used on site. So you need to have a high proportion of the electricity used on site in order for the scheme to be financially viable. So we need to look at that, and so obviously tenants will use different amounts of electricity. So it's how you judge whether they're going to be using sufficient electricity. It's more likely to be possible on sites where you've got multiple homes that share the same supply, because that way it just makes the billing easier again. So it comes down to the administrative cost of trying to bill large numbers of consumers for the electricity they use, and the risk of people not wanting to pay, or the high cost of collecting income from people if you're charging people for use of electricity. And you've got things obviously like if the building is unoccupied for some period of time, then you obviously can't get any income from the electricity that's used on site. So basically it goes down to there being no income from the electricity used on site.
Hi, Rhiannon.
So that's really a very rapid rundown. I think the other speakers will go into some of those things in a bit more detail. But basically, I think there are more complicated issues to deal with than when the feed-in tariff were in place. But basically, the high electricity prices that we're going through at the moment mean that we really need to investigate this as a mechanism, and I think it could be made to work. Okay, sorry, I think I've probably taken a bit more than I should have on time, but
No, that's great. Thanks, Jeremy.
Very happy to take any questions.
Yeah, no, I think that David had a question, and so I was wondering if David just wanted to ask that now. It's probably more relevant than waiting to
I guess
after.
it was just that you talked about delivering returns to the community over an acceptable return on the member investment. And I guess for cynics does that happen? Do you get projects that invest back into the community? And I think somebody in the chat replied saying, yeah, very much so.
Absolutely, very much so. Yes. There's lots of schemes that now are generating quite decent sort of community benefit funds. So yes, that does happen. The fair return is there isn't an exact number that's placed on what the return can be. It depends a bit on what the project is and what the risk is. But yes, they create community benefit funds, and they're being of great value at the moment. I'm sure Mary will sort of be able to verify that.
Great, perfect. Well, then I'm sure we'll get some more questions towards the end. So thank you, Jeremy. But then for now, I'll invite Tony to go ahead and present. That works. Oh, I think maybe Jeremy will have to.
I'm just trying to work out how to end the share.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Perfect. And we'll switch over to Tony's presentation.
Can we see that?
Great. Yeah.
Just try and change it to.
I think if you go to slideshow, then it should be,
I'm trying to get to it. Yeah. I've got a zoom menu in the way. There we go. Now what?
Perfect.
All right, we got there. Okay, good. Just move that out of my way. Right. Okay. Great introduction from Jeremy. So I can take a lot of that for granted now. I'm going to concentrate on three things which I think could be done now by social housing, could be funded through community energy groups, or might be funded through a housing association or even a tenants association, maybe. So I'm going to rattle through these three. First of all, how to share rooftop solar, a single installation amongst multiple flats in a block of flats. Secondly, a way of actually making use of electricity from a community, probably community energy group owned local renewable energy generator. And lastly, the potential for solar carports. Okay, so first off, Sharing rooftop solar. So up until now, largely, if you've had a householder who owns a house and has got enough money, they could install solar on the roof. Housing associations have installed solar on the roofs of houses that are part of their stock. But if you're in a block of flats, largely people in flats have not had a way to access rooftop solar. So there's a device now. It is the only device that's available from anybody. So this is a plug for an individual company because there is no alternative as yet. A device called a SolShare. It comes from an Australian company called Illume. And Illume Energy now have branched out and they're supplying in Europe and in the US as well. And the device has been designed specifically to take the output from a single large rooftop solar array and then divide it amongst multiple flats. And this is for a situation where each flat has their own electricity meter and they're each paying their own electricity bill. So the solar supply comes in a way that's described as being behind the meter. So that means that the flat can have any grid electricity supplier. Doesn't matter who that supplier is. As far as the supplier is concerned, they don't see that solar electricity coming in as such. They just see a reduced demand. The individual flats could have smart meters, and that's no problem, but they aren't required for this to work. And the device isn't just a simple equal split at any given moment of time. It's a smart device. So it shares out so that over a period, typically a month, everyone gets equal shares. At least that's the most common way to configure it. There are other alternatives. So for example, you could have tenant one who's home all the way through the day. So they're using electricity during the day and taking solar as it's provided from the rooftop array. And then tenant two may be out most of the day. They don't come back until late afternoon. So they've used very little during the day. So the SolShare flags the fact that tenant one has had lots already today and will stop supplying tenant one as soon as tenant two's demand goes up and switch to supplying tenant two. So in that kind of way, over the period of a month, it can give equal shares to everyone. As I said, that's the most common way of configuring it, but it can be configured in other ways. For instance, it could be set up so that someone who is, say, maybe more or less housebound and is home all day, gets access to more solar electricity than someone who is out at work every day. It could be set up so that, say, a two-bedroom flat with a family in it gets access to more solar electricity than a one-bedroom flat with a single tenant. So there are alternative options for it. And as well as the benefits I've already pointed out, this smart sharing means that there's much less export. It's much less likely that you will get a time when there's more solar being generated than can be used by the collective of everyone who's there in this multi-occupant building. So we get greater value for the electricity being generated. As Jeremy said, if you export, it's worth a lot less. And that also means that even if the amount of solar installed per individual tenant is not very much, I mean, typically on a house, you might have 3.5, 4 kilowatts. It could be on a block of flats, even if you've only got 1 or 2 kilowatts per tenant, because it's used in such an efficient way, it's still making a significant difference for them. So compared with individual systems, you know, if they each had their own bit of system and they were the sole user of it, Compared with that, you've got 40 to 50% higher on-site consumption, so much better value. And the energy performance certificate for every flat is improved, and that's, you know, something that is being required of landlords, whether they're social landlords or commercial landlords. EPCs have got to be improved, so it's one way through that. On to my next topic then. There is a way in which the renewable electricity generated by probably a community benefit society owned generator that is local to people. There is a way for those local people to get a cheaper supply of electricity from that local generator that gets around the problem that Jeremy mentioned of having to supply all of the electricity to someone that you're supplying to. And this is something called Energy Local. It was pioneered first, I think, in Bethesda in North Wales, but now there are multiple groups across Wales mostly, although I know of at least one in England, and I think there will be more. And so the way that this works, it means that there's time matching of the local renewable generation with the local demand. And where the two are matched in time, the user, the consumer, gets a cheaper rate for the electricity than they would do if they were having to pay grid rate. So they are paying for it, but they're paying rather less. And potentially the generator may get a little bit more for their each kilowatt hour that they're generating that gets locally used, rather than just selling it to a national off-taker. So at its best, it gives benefits both to the local generator and to the local consumer. We've got some background noise from someone with a thanks. Okay, so how to get best use of it? There's an online energy dashboard which allows tenants to see when the local generator is generating and when cheap renewable electricity is available. That, of course, relies on people actually looking and thinking about it. In addition to that, it's possible to have a kind of smart plug which can be attached to a particular device, and that can be used to automatically switch on something like a washing machine at a cheap time. So you don't have to think about it so much, at least once you've set it up, you don't have to think about it. It will then function automatically. And here's an image of part of the dashboard to give you an idea of what it's like. So in this image, we've got red bars are the on-site consumption from all of the local consumers combined at times when there isn't any solar, or in times when solar isn't enough to cover all of the local demand. So red is supply from the grid. Where we've got a solid yellow, I can point at one, yeah, so the solid yellow part is the local, in this case it's solar production, but it doesn't have to be. Different energy local groups. Some have got micro hydro projects, so it's water power. Some have got a wind turbine. There's at least one has got an anaerobic digester producing electricity, and here we've got a solar one. So yeah, the solid yellow bar is the locally produced solar which is being consumed locally. And then if you can make it out, there is a paler sort of slightly orange bit above in some cases. That's where the locally generated solar is greater than the local demand. So that's getting exported to the grid at a cheaper rate. And over here, I just clicked on one of the bars to get this image. and it's telling us that this is being measured every half hour, the collective consumption and the total generation. So at 11:30 yesterday, Monday, the amount of used solar, actually this is slightly wrong, it really means 1.4 kilowatt hours of solar electricity was used locally in half an hour period. So that's 2.8 kilowatts average, but never mind if you don't follow that. But anyway, the 1.4 kilowatt hours used solar, 7.4 kilowatts of excess solar that was above and beyond the local demand, so that got exported, and 1.4 kilowatt hours of total consumption. That's all that the local users were using in that particular half hour. So that at that particular half hour, it was all provided from solar. We've got a couple of bars over here where it's part yellow, part red. So there the solar has provided some of the local demand, but not enough to be all of the local demand. So that's been topped up from the grid with the red. And in this instance, the solar price was 6.3 pence per kilowatt hour, and the extra energy was at 20.58p per kilowatt hour. And so what do you need to set this up? Well, first of all, you need to have a local renewable generator, and local here really means below the same substation. So we're really talking about what part of the grid is being used to transmit energy from the generator to the consumer. So that, as I say, that's likely to be owned by a community benefit society. So a first port of call could be to see if you've got a community benefit society, a community energy group in your area. If there isn't, you might have one that would be happy to set something up within your area, even though it hasn't as yet. And if you got in touch with them and said, look, we've got a bunch of tenants who are interested in buying, well, it could help make the case for, okay, let's investigate this and see if we can do it. Every tenant must have a smart meter. That's because the whole thing works on this half-hourly matching, time matching of generation and consumption. And it's got to be a smart meter that's smart enough to be read remotely every half hour, which not all of them are. First generation maybe won't. And each of the tenants has got to sign up to be a member of an energy local club, and that in effect is a kind of cooperative financial conduct authority and all of that. And the tenant has also got to sign up with a particular national energy supplier who is handling all of the time matching and billing. So they don't have a choice of who they sign up with and still be member of the Energy Local Club. A lot of these are now being handled by Octopus, who are doing all the time matching and billing. Early ones were handled by Cooperative Energy, part of the co-op group. So on to my last little topic, and less to say about this in some ways, the potential for solar carports, because lots of people are aware of rooftop solar. Everyone's seen an installation somewhere probably, and some people have got their own. But there's less awareness of solar carports. The scale of solar carports can be anything from a single vehicle to up to multi-megawatts. The Jaguar car factory in England has got, I don't know, I think it's about 5 or 6 megawatts of solar carport, covering where their workers park their cars and where cars that they've produced sit until they get delivered somewhere. So you can see the kind of structure that's typical. We've got a metal supporting framework, and we've got panels. In this case, they're bidirectional, bifacial panels. So light is actually landing on the outer surface, coming through between the individual cells. You can see the dots of light and faint lines between the cells. So the light's coming through, getting reflected off the tarmac and the cars underneath, and actually generating a little bit from the back of the panel as well as the top of it. And that's typical for carports as well as solar farms being installed now, as opposed to rooftop solar. So this gives you something extra to rooftops, or maybe an alternative to rooftops. As I said, you can have any scale you like from a single car upwards. If it's right next to a building and the land that it's on is owned by the same outfit as whoever owns the building, you could supply the building directly. Also, maybe in a situation where it's not right next to the building, you could have a battery built into it that charges up from solar and then supplies an electric vehicle charging point. And that can be a good way of providing EV charging, particularly during the day when the solar is generating, but by having the static battery built into the framework of the carport, it can be charging overnight from solar that it's gathered up during the day. And of course, there are sort of fringe benefits that the carport is sheltering the car from rain and sun, so that it doesn't heat up so much during the day if it's parked on a sunny day. And people trying to get in and out of cars and battling with umbrellas and raincoats and things are sheltered from the rain while they're doing that. So possible scope for that, along with electric vehicle charging, which is your last topic of the day, I think. And that's it from me. If I can end my share. Yep, there we go.
Great, thanks so much, Tony. We had one question from Peter that I believe was directed at you. He said, is there any consideration of battery storage? We could just touch on that.
Is there any consideration of battery storage? Right. If you've got the sole share, then because you've got a very high level of on-site use, that kind of cancels the need for a battery to an extent. The economics of batteries are a bit on the edge at the moment. So for lots of individuals putting solar on their own house out of their own money, very often they are installing a battery at the same time now. Partly because you get zero VAT on a battery if it's installed at the same time as rooftop solar, but not if you do it at some other time, bizarrely. So a lot of people are installing it, but quite how well it pays for itself, I mean, everything's up in the air with, you know, extremely high electricity prices at the moment, but it can be a bit borderline depending on the individual case. If you've got carports where they aren't right next to a building, but they could supply EV charging, then absolutely batteries are vital to how that is going to work well.
Mm-hmm.
Can I come back on that? There are schemes being proposed whereby you use, for a large community, weightlifting battery storage. In other words, the electricity pushes a weight up, and when it's needed, the weight pushes back and generates the electricity.
Right. There are multiple ways of storing electricity: gravity ones, liquid air, liquid CO2, flow batteries, static, solid batteries. All sorts of alternatives are out there. A lot of the problem is with regulation rather than technology for all of this stuff. If you can attach a battery behind the meter in the same way that you attach solar behind the meter, it doesn't matter from the point of view of your electricity supplier and the grid. If you attach a battery to the grid, you are now a generator in effect as far as the grid is concerned. So a lot of small and indeed large renewable generators are installing batteries co-located with the generation, because they can get more at certain times of day for selling to the grid than they can at other times. And also community energy, and commercial renewables are often now co-locating. So where you've got wind turbines have been around for a while, they'll add some solar, because the pattern of generation at different times of day will be different and complementary. So they can get the most out of their grid connection, and they'll probably put batteries in there as well. Because you can get, as a generator, you can get paid more at times of maximum demand and much less at times of lower demand. In Australia, they've got a big drive for community batteries now. And I mean, actually, the idea of a community battery, so this is a battery which is below a substation, but attached to that low voltage network rather than to an individual user. And from a technical efficiency point of view, that's ideal, because you can get maximum use of the battery compared with everyone having their own battery and maybe not using it all that well.
That was what I meant. A major where there's large communities, it may be worthwhile.
The problem with that is the regulations make that an absolute nightmare at the moment in the UK. So it's really down to Ofgem making this pretty impossible to do so far.
And if I could,
so technically it makes good sense. And in fact, one thing I didn't mention, on Energy Local at the moment, you can each Energy Local club can only have a single renewable generator. Technically, it's perfectly possible for everyone with half-hour smart meters to be a generator as well as a consumer, for every battery to be smart, and to have a virtual power station, so everyone is peer-to-peer trading. It's perfectly technically possible, but Ofgem make it next to impossible so far.
right, and if I could cut in,
Thank you.
I see that George has a question. If we can save that for the end, I am aware we need to get Mallory's presentation as well. So I'm going to kick it off to Mallory. And again, for the interpretation, you can click the globe at the bottom of your screen and choose which language you want to hear in.
Yeah, my question was basically the local sharing of suppliers. Where I live in a rural community, there's only about 100 houses, but on each side of the village, there are farmers that are generating from hydroelectric. You know, I live in the Snowdonia National Park, so there's lots of mountains and lakes that you can do hydroelectric on. Also, a lot of the farmers' barns have solar arrays on the roof. I have my own 3 kilowatts of solar panels, and I do have an electric car, but I was just wondering if there is a way of setting up a connection between the hydro schemes each side of the village and the village itself over.
I think this is what Mallory's going to talk about now.
Yeah.
If that's okay. Yeah.
All right, Mallory, off to you.
Mallory?
Oh, I think Mallory's on mute.
Yeah. Sorry. Good start. Iawn, mi fyddai'n siarad yn Gymraeg.
Right, well, I'll be speaking in Welsh, so remember to click the icon for the translation. So thank you for the invitation to speak. I work closely with Jeremy through Community Energy Wales, and much of what Jeremy was speaking about brought me back memories about setting up Aniogwen, and listening to Tony speaking as well. As he said, the first Energy Local Club in Wales was set up in Bethesda, and I was part of the process of trying to recruit 100 people to be part of it. And I'm very glad it started in Bethesda, but Tony's quite right. It's quite frustrating, the restrictions placed by Ofgem upon communities, because Aniogwen wants to link in with the energy community energy. So Energy Local is in Bethesda is using hydropower from the National Trust's energy. So yes, anyway, thank you both previous speakers. I'm now going to give you an overview of the type of community development work and environmental work happening in the Ogwen Valley, and I'll touch on the projects like Aniogwen, the hydro scheme, and the solar work we're doing now. But also, I'll talk a bit about the social aspects, that is, those aspects involving tackling fuel poverty, helping people environmentally, a fleet of electric vehicles to tackle transport poverty and so on. So I'll go beyond the renewable energy generation. So I hope it's all working now. So I'm just trying to move slide. There we are. So this is the Ogwen Valley, the area I live in and work in, and it's a very beautiful area, and this photo conveys everything that the Ogwen Partnership is trying to do, trying to create a community, environmental and cultural world, but also economical. And all our projects try to balance and tie in those elements of sustainability in our work. And I'll be coming back to those four elements fairly frequently when describing the projects in the Ogwen Valley. So as you can see, we have exceptionally beautiful landscape. Bethesda itself isn't in the national park, but we do have the mountains behind us, Carneth y Filias, y Gyrn, y Glyderau, Cwm Idwal. And if you go back down through Nant Francon and follow the Ogwen River that powers the community hydro, you come back past the quarry, which is an economic focus for the Ogwen Valley for 100 years and more. You'll pass two very beautiful forests, Pen y Braich and Parc Merig, and you come back right to the heart of this photo, the village of Bethesda, the houses, the high streets, the homes, the people. And to me, that is the core of my work. That's at the heart of what I do and what the team are doing, servicing the people in this valley and in this village and creating that economic world with cultural community benefits. So how do we go about doing that then? Well, this was the first project. I'll give you a bit of background. Ogwen Partnership was set up in 2013 by innovation with between three communities in the past. They employed individual clerks working part-time. So what they did was they got together and formed a new legal entity, Ogwen Partnership. So we provide a clerking service for the community councils, but through that collaboration, they created the efficiency savings to create a project management resource. And to all intents and purposes, that's why I was employed as an efficiency saving. And my work was to develop projects. And at the beginning, I worked 2 days a week. We had a clerk for 2 days a week. Now we employ a team of 23 members of staff working in their communities and have developed a number of regeneration projects which are important to the area. So in terms of our business plan and our ethos, local ownership, those words are important to us. So it's local ownership of assets, bricks and mortar, but also natural assets. So in terms of property, we have 7 commercial properties, 5 flats that we rent out to local people. We emphasize that our rent is affordable. That's important to us. We have work to do in terms of updating some of the flats in terms of energy efficiency. And Dianto, our energy warden, is working on the EPCs at the moment to improve the standard of some of the flats. Also, we've been fortunate in working with Gwynedd Council on a transfer of assets. So we've got the library at Bethesda's that's been transferred to us on lease, and also Canolfan Kenbais. We've just bought a new building on the High Street, the old post building, Hen Bost, and we'll be developing a centre there for heritage. So we also have green areas with raised beds in the village where we plant edible plants to share within our communities. And some of the wellbeing work we do is developing round these green areas, and of course the allotments we've developed. So looking back now at energy again, well, when I started with the Partneriaeth Ogwen in 2014, one of my first tasks was to work with the community to bring people together to develop the Ynni Ogwen scheme. And there's a Welsh saying, you know, to turn the water back into our own mill. And what that means is that we use our own assets, we take ownership of them and turn that water to our own benefits, really, to the benefit of our community. So that's the background. And we started developing the project with a group of volunteers. It took about 2 years to develop the project in terms of all the feasibility studies and the biodiversity studies and the trees and fish mobility and so on. And to make sure we weren't developing anything that would be detrimental to the river, that was important to us. And so we were fortunate and unfortunate as well. The feed-in tariff was halved. So had we been just a few months, well, to be honest, just a few weeks sooner, we would have succeeded in getting 16 pence per kilowatt hour. But unfortunately, the process of assessing our water extraction certificate took longer than expected, so we missed out on the higher feeding tariff. Nevertheless, we had a viable business plan and we succeeded in building this scheme. And we did that through a community shareholders scheme, as Jeremy described, and we raised a sum of this sum. And this is a huge sum for an area like Dyffryn Ogwen, of course. And in terms of our members, we have over 300 members. They're all investors, but we call them members. And that's an important definition in my mind, because it's not a financial relationship. It's where people have committed to the vision of what Dyffryn Ogwen is. So that is an important point, I feel. And we have regular tours down to the hydro. That's Griff Wynn there. Griff worked with us during the construction phase, and he's now gone on to be a hydro consultant himself. So there is a broader legacy than just building a weir in a river. There's a social legacy here for projects like Ynni Ogwen, and it's all led by volunteers. So although Partneriaeth Ogwen set up the scheme, it's now an independent legal entity with a board of volunteers and myself as a volunteer director still with them, and we're very pleased of the work that's taking place. And since developing the hydro scheme, Ynni Ogwen, we've also gone on to develop a solar scheme, Hildro Ogwen, that's what we've called that. So where we've actually installed 21 kilowatt solar panels on community buildings in the valley. So we've got the rugby club, the cricket club, and the library. This was the transfer asset from Gwynedd Council. So this building now is in the ownership of Partneriaeth Ogwen. But we've worked with Ynni Ogwen, put the PVs on the roof, and we've also got charging points outside of this building to power one of our EV community cars. So at the moment, we are hoping to expand Hildro Ogwen, the solar scheme, by working with others in the area. Some of those, the surgery is one of them, and their usage is high. We're in discussion with the quarry, and also we have Cenfais Centre, another transfer asset that Partneriaeth Ogwen is involved in. And there is quite a high usage in those buildings, and that's an important point. The 21 kilowatts we have at the moment on the community buildings. We did have some FIT support for that scheme, so that was 5p of feed-in tariff. So to the future now, the plans will have to stack up, and as Tony said, we'll have to make sure there's enough usage within the building. One thing I always say about Ynni Ogwen is that it's been a catalyst. This was the first environmental project that Partneriaeth Ogwen set up, but since we set it up, we went on to develop a number of other environmental projects, and Dyffryn Gwyrdd is the name of the main environmental project to alleviates poverty. It's just under £500,000, and it's a combination of various things involving transport, fuel poverty, and bringing our community together to work in an environmental way. So I mentioned the cars already, but we've got a fleet of 4 vehicles now. We've got the Co-Wheels car, which is a share car. So any member of the community can rent this out for 40 quid a day. And we have Eva, the community car that takes people to appointments and so on. And we've got a van that we use for Cadwyn Ogwen, which delivers food on behalf of businesses to local businesses. And we have the Bus Ogwen. This was funded through WEFO funding. Final pennies, I think, of the WEFO funding. So this is Evan and Colin, our drivers. And during the summer, it's used by tourists, carrying people from Bethesda up to Nans Francon and back regularly throughout the day. And the purpose, in a way, is to try and to bring, well, some economy back into Dyffryn Ogwen and to reduce parking. And this is the parking in Nans Francon at the moment. There's dreadful parking problems there. So Bus Ogwen is an example of how Partneriaeth Ogwen is looking at the valley and facing the challenge and finding innovative solutions, but which are also environmental solutions to the problem. So the electric bus, it is an EV, it's powered by local power wherever possible. So once we have more PVs on Canolfan Cenfais, hopefully those PVs will be powering this bus. So in terms of renewable energy and local ownership, helping the environment and the circular economy as well, and keeping the benefit locally, Bus Ogwen and the Bus Ogwen project is an example of how the partnership ties in all those aspects within our work. And it's not just EVs, we have electrical bikes as well, and it's a new fleet. We also do retrofits, so people give us their bikes and we retrofit them with electrical motors, and that makes them more affordable for local people. We rent them out and loan them really to local people, and we have a bike workshop as well. We teach people how to repair their bikes, and I do look forward to see the Ogwen cycle project developing towards the future. Now, just in terms of assets, I just wanted to mention this one. This is our most recent project, hoping to develop a heritage centre on the High Street. As I said, the renewal and regeneration of the High Street is very important to our work. And with this building, we're hoping very much that we've succeeded with a circular economy application to look at to improve the energy aspects of this building, but also with reuse. So we're working with the Penryn Quarry as well to look at how we can use waste slates and how we can use them in a creative way with this building. So sustainable building, it means thinking in a holistic way all the time. So hopefully with this building, we'll have solar panels and the Ogwen, 8 heating system, which is low carbon, but in the fabric of the building, hopefully we will have reduced waste by using a pillar, any pillar that's taken out, hopefully can be reused somewhere else in the building, reduce the use of steel, and also this element of working with the quarry and with the roof slates. I didn't know this before, but that 95% of slate is created when you create roof slates. So what we want to do now is we want to try to reduce that waste rate and how we can use the local slates in Bethesda and use them in a cladding system on the building. You can tell this is a new project, so I'm a bit excited about it actually. So now this is the Kevin Weiss Centre. Now Ynni Ogwen hopefully are going to install PVs on these buildings, and this is where we'll be powering, we are powering the EVs now, but in due course it'll be a community centre. But economic developments will take place here as well. Now, to close, I just want to tell you a little bit with the fuel of poverty alleviation. We have allotments and an officer working in Hans Frankon as well to develop allotments, a wonderful project. And also we do a lot of work with tackling poverty alleviation, and Ianto is working with us as an energy warden. And I'm pleased to say from this month onwards, Ynni Ogwen will be funding Ianto's employment. And in the AGM last year, Ynni Ogwen allocated £20,000 towards the cost of living crisis. And that's an important point to make, I think. It shows how this can, how we can reuse to help our community. So it's the Ynni Ogwen that is now subsidising our officer, and money has been allocated as well towards fuel vouchers. So we're working with Caris and the Fuel Bank Foundation at the moment, and we are disseminating those through our community hub. So we have Pantry Pesta, Bethesda Pantry and Hope Ogwen. So they are projects we run as well, and we share out food parcels locally to anyone in need and in crisis. And we have a project to share waste food as well, and that reduces food wastage. But from the Ogwen Hub, Ianto, our energy officer, and another officer will be working at least twice a week, 10 till 6. People can pop in to have advice on their energy bills, and hopefully we can help them. And if they have a problem, they can have vouchers for fuel. So quite simply, what we're trying to do in the Ogwen Valley is to collaborate over the agency to create a community that's sustainable and fair. I hope the project gives you an idea of what we are doing, and if you'd like to come over, you're more than welcome to do so. We'll give you a trip in the Ogwen bus, we'll take you to the hydro. You're very welcome to get in touch. And I've provided my email address here, and Ianto, he's the energy warden, and the website if you want more details. Thank you very much.
It was great. Thank you so much, Mallory. Let me just switch. There we go. Me and David went and visited Bethesda in December, and it was fascinating and amazing. So cool. We got the bus or the ride in the bus. You guys were just so welcoming, and it was just really great to see, really inspiring. So thanks so much for sharing the project and what you guys are doing. It's really, really amazing and inspiring work. David, I saw that you had a question. I didn't know if you wanted to go ahead and ask. I'm aware that we're probably going to go a few minutes over time. So we'll maybe just put
I
it to
suppose I was just being naive. When we see like wind farms being set up, or maybe the stuff Jeremy was talking about, they negotiate a price or something, isn't it? That was the whole issue with the Swansea Tidal Lagoon, the price. I assumed you were an electric generator, but you, with the feed-in tariff, it feels like it's almost like a domestic supply. Am I getting this wrong? I don't. And with the feed-in tariff going, does that stop your projects going in the future? I'm just being a bit naive here, I think. I don't know.
The
Yeah,
feed-in
follow
tariff
up.
is secured for 20 years.
Right.
So, and the feed-in tariff was a major part of our business plan for the hydro scheme.
But that was
without-
a domestic feed-in tariff, was it? Or no, right.
Can I chip in a bit? I mean, the feed-in
Yeah.
tariff applied to quite big projects as well. Some of the smaller wind turbine projects would also qualify for feed-in tariff, and the bigger ones would have qualified for the ROCs, which were a similar but slightly different variation on it as well. So all of these renewable energy projects were, before the 2019 or so, were subsidised in some form or other. The domestic was just, the 4 kilowatt ones were just one part of the feed-in tariff scheme. It applied to a much wider range of projects and bigger projects.
Okay, I'm just trying to work out, are you getting a fair price compared to all the other gas and everybody else who's creating electricity? Maybe
When you
yeah.
when you get income from the feed, if you build something like the hydro scheme or a wind turbine with the benefit of the feed-in tariff, you receive the feed-in tariff as a separate payment for just the energy you generate, but you then also sell your energy into the grid in the same way that any other generator would.
Oh.
So the hydro scheme and the wind turbine would also have a contract to sell its electricity to one of the electricity suppliers.
And can you tender that and get a good price for it, or is it just fixed?
Yes, that's right.
Right. That was the missing bit. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah.
Right. Well, then I think since we're at 11:15, we'll have to close this session. Thank you again to Jeremy, Tony, and Mallory for speaking and sharing your insight and knowledge. I know that the TPAS Cymru community really appreciates it. And so for everybody else, we do have a session on circular economy at 11:45 and then electric vehicles at 2 p.m. So please join us for those sessions. It's the same Zoom link. Sorry if you had any issues with the registration. But for now, we'll take a brief break and then see you back at 11:45.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.